Yeah, so look, we're just so excited. This is the culmination of 3 years' work. Wing Commander Ferguson and I were looking back over the records when they arrived, and we noted the date on a letter from the then Minister Peter Tingley supporting our application. It was dated the 24th of June 2019, so we're nearly exactly 3 years down the track. And how it came about was that some of you met Trevor Fettis, who was our then manager of the museum, and he had heard that the RAF was retiring the Tornado fleet. And I remember the meeting really clearly. We sat together and he said, "What do you reckon, will we apply for one?" And we sort of laughed about it and then thought, oh, how good would it be to have a Tornado in the collection? And so we started getting a bit serious about it and getting excited about it, but of course it was a huge commitment, so it couldn't only just be a spark of an idea that we ran off and did impulsively. And I have to acknowledge the leadership group and our CEO and Clive and the board of RAFA, because they got as excited as what we did. So Trevor went off and wrote a letter to the History and Heritage branch, which of course was Wing Commander Erica Ferguson, and we just really kind of forgot about it, albeit that our excitement was still there, but we just waited. And then we received an email to say that Wing Commander Ferguson was coming out to visit our museum to audit it to see if we were a suitable location for one of the Tornadoes. So it was quite intimidating really, because we were dealing with this Wing Commander, and there was a lot riding on it, and we hadn't met Erica, so we sort of imagined this stern Wing Commander somewhere in the UK deciding on the fate of whether we got one or not. She heard our plans and she saw the collection that we have and knew of our Lancaster, and so it progressed from there. But when you think about it, it was actually quite ridiculous. The thought of shipping a Tornado to little old Perth, Western Australia, was quite a ridiculous notion when I look back on it, because why would they do that? And it's only happened because of Erica's passion and her tenacity and her just wonderful talent of bringing everybody together. So it's just been a massive project that's involved certainly the RAF, but I have to say the support from the RAAF has been huge. You've probably heard we had to get Pentagon approval to put the aircraft on a ship. The RAAF had to approve that, and I had a phone call from an Air Commodore in Amberley to say, I'm going to sign this, but do you understand the responsibility that you're taking on? And I said, yeah, I think I do. And he said, well, you better get up to speed on it, because I'm going to put my name to this. And that was the approval to support us having a Tornado and applying to the Pentagon. And the RAAF, the Australian Air Force, has just been magnificent. The support that we've had from them to actually land the aircraft. And just the work, you'll hear from Warrant Officer Keith Davies shortly, but his JARTS team, and he'll tell you a bit about the JARTS team in the UK, but his team, the work, the hundreds and hundreds of hours that they've put in to get the aircraft ready to ship and to prepare it for display. And we're very special, which of course we knew, didn't we, Erica? We are very special. Just the work that they've done and the equipment that they've brought over and that they're leaving with us is just quite overwhelming. And I have to say, we've got 2 engines coming now to be installed. and they're actually being backloaded on a C-17 from a delivery to Ukraine, going to Amberley and then being backloaded again on a C-17 back to Perth, and that won't cost us a cent as an aircraft. So that's enough from me. I'd like to introduce you to Wing Commander Erica Ferguson, and she'll be followed by Warrant Officer Keith Davies to tell you the story from the JARTS team point of view. Erica.
Good afternoon, everybody. Wing Commander Erica Ferguson. I am not an old flyer. I am an ageing, retired air traffic controller whose job now is to tell stories. Now, I know that that aeroplane is splendid in her own right, but far more splendid are the stories of service and sacrifice that surround 30 years of a frontline military fast jet aircraft. And it was the stories that the museum already tell here about the cooperation, the 13 Australian personnel from CH47 Squadron who flew on the Dams raid, and how beautifully they were told, was the inspiration for me to decide that barking mad idea of bringing a Tornado to Australia was in fact a good and worthwhile idea to pursue. And the whole project has been delightful. I was lucky enough to host a Royal Australian Air Force Mosquito veteran at a dinner to celebrate and commemorate the courage and tenacity of those who flew in the Battle of Britain. His name was Bob Cowper, and Bob explained to me there were no Australian Battle of Britain veterans left. This was back in 2010, because they had fought so hard and furiously during the Battle of Britain. At the end of it, there were very few of them left alive then and none left now. And that's where I think that link to stories and inspiration came from. So it felt quite apt to me that an Australian pilot inspired me to look into those stories, and now I've had the opportunity to share the aircraft out here in Australia. Has anybody here flown a Tornado? You're a mixture of... No. Because I'm now giving Ian and this wonderful board here the job of telling those stories and bringing it to life, and bringing the Australian Tornado community, which is far bigger than you think. When I came out on my first visit, I met Sue, who flew F3s, met an Australian-born pilot who'd done an exchange tour and flown that particular jet, and a Brit who was one of those excellent pilots that you, dare I say, stole from us back in the 90s to come out and join the RAAF. So there's a great deal of stories to be told, and I look forward to coming back and hearing more of them on my next visit. But in the meantime, given your old Fliers focus, I thought it was a fabulous opportunity for you to learn more about this team and what they do. The technical issues of bringing that aircraft over here were immense, and I couldn't have done it without the help and support of the JARTS team. So I'd like to hand over to Warrant Officer Keith Davies to give you that background.
Good afternoon. Yes, I'm Warrant Officer Keith Davies. As any good warrant officer does, I came in today to carry the bags for the Wing Commander, and then I was asked to say a few words, and now I'm one of the key speakers here. I am honoured to speak to aircraft operators and pilots and front-end crew, and I'd like to show you a little bit of what has to happen when your job doesn't go exactly how it should do, which is only a very small fraction of the time. You can see our badge up there, which was endorsed by Her Majesty the Queen, and it says Swift to Recover. So that's what we do in our core role, is we recover aircraft. Generally that have had to land with a technical fault and they can't get back to their base, or unfortunately if there is a crash, which we'll go on to look at a few scenarios later on. So we are the Joint Aircraft Recovery and Transportation Squadron. We're made up of Royal Navy and Royal Air Force technicians, and I've actually got about as many people in the audience as I have in my squadron. and most of them are back home. We had a little bit of a wish list as to who was going to come, but we only brought the very best guys across with us. Many of you will know the large helicopter that we operate, which is the CH47 Hercules. Chinook. This crew were operating in Oxfordshire and they had a hydraulic failure in flight. They decided they were going to put it down in the field, which they thought was going to be okay. Unfortunately, it all didn't turn out like that. Everybody walked away, the aircraft was put down. I'm on an hour's notice, so I got the phone call saying that we have a downbird, is what we call it. What will generally happen is I'll go along and I'll extract it from the mud. Normally it's a simple winching operation to get it out. Unfortunately for this one, it had gone in rather deep. And when I attempted to walk myself in the field, it just sunk up to my ankles. The Chinook aircraft has a number of hooks that we carry underslung loads on the bottom, and they were all stuck in at different angles, so dragging the helicopter out just wasn't an option. I spoke to the aircraft operators and we discussed whether we could just dig out a patch and then fly it out, but because of the reconnaissance of the aircraft, we weren't happy to do that, so we had to go for a full extraction. Aircrew being aircrew still maintained their sense of humour and chopped the aircraft before they left. So my first instruction to the team was nobody in this team is to drive any wheeled vehicles onto the field because it will not take a wheeled vehicle. My boss turned up and thought she knew better than me, and we ended up losing the tractor in the field. So you can see from there what the challenges were going to be for getting the helicopter out, and you can see how far the helicopter is into the field. So we started off with some lightweight matting, just to show around the aircraft, to make sure that we could work near it without making the immediate vicinity unworkable. We then set about with shovels and spades to get the aircraft loose and out of the section. You'll see there one of my guys with a little trowel. It does look as if it's not the correct implement for that, but around the back of that wheel there's a brake pack and all the hydraulic hoses, so we had to be very technical with the way that we dug it out. I then had to set out on finding a way of getting some cranes into the field. So I managed to find a nearby warehouse that had a mechanical road, and I drafted in an army unit to roll the road out using a JCB there. So what actually happens is the spool gets loaded on and it rolls out in front of the tractor unit. And I had to get 300 metres of this to get out to the aircraft. Then I had the problem of cranes. So we use something called a California bearing aeration. I don't know if anyone else uses that in the civil industry, but it's a probe that tests the hardness of the ground. And what we'd established was the actual field was as good as loose sand on a beach. So we were faced with the problem of a 16-ton helicopter and very loose materials to operate the cranes from. We crunched a load of numbers and we figured out we couldn't get one crane in there, so we needed two. But then we had to build platforms for the cranes. So I had to go and spend £10,000 of the taxpayers' money on railway sleepers. And what we did was we set them out like that in pads. So we got two cranes in, and we said the one crane on the left and the second crane on the right. The actual maths of this was so close that the rear crane was operating at 99% of its capacity. If we had to do anything other than that, we'd have had to bring three cranes in, and it would have been an absolute nightmare. The plan worked. Most of the time with aircraft recovery, we have to have a plan A, plan B. Thankfully, on this occasion, plan A worked. So there was the obligatory selfie, and the aircraft was back in the air. We then filled in the holes with some plastic blocks, and then we set about putting some mats down in a herringbone configuration so we could lower the aircraft back down. And then the aircraft came back in and flew the aircraft out. All was good. However, my organisation is then left with the mess of recovering it, and what we have to do is leave the site as if the military hadn't had their incident. So we set about trying to recover the road we recovered. The last photograph I'm going to show you, I think kind of depicts how we were at the end of the week. That's how we were. It was in January, in our winter, so you can imagine morale was a bit of a roller coaster. But even now I get guys coming up to me saying that it was one of the most rewarding jobs that they've done. Getting a serviceable helicopter back to flight without any secondary damage in them conditions is a success. Just another couple of examples of what we've done. This is an Apache, very similar to an emergency landing, and everything was fine. There was a big storm coming through, so they lashed the aircraft down. Unfortunately, when the storm came through, then the waters came through, the floods came through, and the actual motion of them lashing the aircraft down pulled it into the ground. So we had to do a similar recovery of that. Other things that we use is pneumatic lifting. So if we have an incident where we get an airliner that's had a wheels-up landing, which thankfully we've only done once in the UK military, at an airhead, we've come in with what we call airbags. We say rapid runway clearance. It probably takes about 8 to 10 hours to get one of these fully lifted. But you'll see there, the airbags that we use are very low pressure. So if your car pressure, if it ties in your car maybe 30 psi, that will only take 4 psi to lift an aircraft. So we can lift 100 tons of aircraft off 4 to 5 psi. You can almost get your hands in there. A couple more kind of photographs of rapid runway clearance there. And then this was another job that we've done for the Wing Commander, a sad dismantling of an old V bomber, which was a gate guardian at RAF Marham. And unfortunately she went for scrap. And it's just another example of if you don't look after your aircraft and you don't keep it covered, the elements will ultimately get to it. And there's another example of the airbag. Another downbird that we had recently, this was a Juno, and it had a wire stripe. So you can see the front corner of the aircraft there, that actually did its job. It cut the wire as it went through, as one of the power cables went through, but unfortunately the cable whipped around and hit the back end there, and it's a composite structure. So your old-fashioned helicopters or airframes would have been able to be repaired, but this is probably going to be, it's Cat 5 we call it, and it's probably going to be a scrap aircraft. Now going on to a little bit more high-speed, high-energy crashes. So that's a Hawk. It's one of our training aircraft, and it both ejected, so there was no fatalities on this. But you can see the challenges that we get in the woodlands trying to recover all the metal parts. And it's not just all the metal parts that we have to recover. When we leave the site, we have to leave it free from fuels. We have to make sure that the environment is put back to how it was. And then that's when the investigation starts. I've got one last thought for you, and it's an aircraft that you have as well. It's an F-35. It's the first one that we've lost in an unfortunate incident on a naval aircraft carrier. This is under investigation, so I have no further photographs of this. But this was taken and it was published in a British newspaper, so it is open source. So it is an F-35, which was looking rather sad. You can see there. So it actually sunk to the bottom of the Mediterranean at 2 kilometres, and it was on its back. So we rescued it back to the ship for deck, and we transported it back to the UK. So there's a little bit of a canter through as to what we do as an organisation. So looking after recovery of aircraft is our primary role, but when we're not doing that, we are transporting aircraft, and that's something that we use to increase our skill sets for when we do have accidents and incidents. So working on museum pieces and heritage roles, or transporting aircraft that need to go to an airhead to fly out to a war zone is something that is our secondary role. So having the honour of bringing your aircraft to you here is just a number of tasks that we've got ongoing at the moment. We've taken Tornadoes to Scotland, to Ireland, to Wales, and now you guys are proud owners of one. So if you've got any questions about aircraft recovery or investigations, by all means I'm happy to answer them.
Good try. Keith, that aircraft is less than 7,000 hours active service. Is that usual for that aircraft?
So it's very usual for a fast jet. Our transport fleet would be 3 times that. However, they're still not comparable to civil industry.
And what work do you do when approaching a civil aviation accident? How do you get involved?
Okay, so normally military engineers would get involved in civil aircraft industry, but we have a memorandum of understanding with the aircraft investigation branch, which is the UK version, and we will go out and we will effectively become the workforce for their investigators. So they take the lead on it, but we will recover the aircraft for them, whether that's 747 or down to a very small GA aircraft. So,
are you happy leaving the Tornado out in the open, or do you plan to cover it?
So I will hand you back to the museum for that, but we would prefer, wherever possible, is that aircraft are covered.
No.
When the power plants arrive, will they be reinstalled in the aeroplane, or will they be mounted as a static display?
So you already have static display in the museum, so they will be both installed. And the Tornado is a peculiar aircraft with regards to when the engines aren't fitted, it just doesn't look right at the back end. So getting them across is very important, and something that's being pushed very hard. So the Tornado, its operating weight is going to be about 16 tons. The one you've got now is going to be somewhere between 13 or 14 tons. Just when you have a chance to look around the aircraft, it is quite unique when it comes to the swing ring technology that's fitted to it. There are only a small number of fast jets that use that. And where most aircraft have a number of bolts holding the wings on, that's only got one. It's got one large pin that's normally frozen in place that hinges the whole wings around. And when we're doing these types of jobs, what we've done is we've just milled a couple of thou off the pins so that we can put them in rather than freezing them in. Dealing with liquid nitrogen is not very safe, so we try to do that try to limit that where possible.
I'm asking about moving the Tornado to another museum site. Is it practical?
We've managed to move it all the way here, so everything is achievable. It would be an enormous project to move all of those aircraft, but perhaps there are greater challenges than the Tornado, because at least we've got some current experience.
Yeah.
And what we have done is, one of the volunteers has come around with this, and we've mentored him through fitting all the major components to the aircraft, and he's documented that and filmed it as well. So we've tried to pass on our information and our knowledge wherever possible, without selling myself short of coming back to Australia. So,
is there another Tornado being given to a museum in Australia?
this is it. There are no plans to gift any Tornadoes to anywhere outside the UK.
Wasn't that something? Big round of applause again to Keith, to Ian and to Erica for taking the time out to tell us about that.